Welcome back, friends. This is our first lesson in the drumming for health and spirituality, wellness. And in this lesson, I'm going to go over some basics of playing as an accompaniment for, let's call it meditation. You could use this for inducing trance states, but I want to be clear that we're looking at musical components right now. How those components are used, how those techniques are used is another issue that we're going to cover a range of possibilities in another lesson. And I want to be really clear also that as far as my teaching goes, music will not be presented as prescriptive. In other words, I would never present any musical element as having an absolute effect on somebody. We don't do music to people as a cure, like some magical cure. We do music, and then whatever effect that has to do with a lot of other factors, including, the person, you, the environment, the situation. And this goes for yourself as well. If you're playing music for yourself, your mood, what's going on at the moment, how you might perceive of the music in that moment from day to day. So a lot of things change, and so that's why I don't want to get locked into any kind of concrete thinking about, okay, if I play this rhythm, it's going to have this effect. I know there's a lot of information out there in books and online and in lectures and people talking about it that way. That hasn't been my experience. My experience leads me to believe that there's a lot more going on, that there's a lot other variables involved. So I just want to be clear about that. It doesn't mean that we can't aim for some sort of outcome based on historical uses and context and even some science. But I just want to be clear that that's where I'm coming from. So with that said, we're going to look at what is generally considered to be quote-unquote shamanic drumming or trance drumming, and a little bit about that in this lesson. But before we get to that part, before we get to the music part, let's talk about some nuts and bolts stuff. Holding the drum, getting a good sound, what types of considerations you might want to have for selecting an instrument, mallet, how to use them, how to get a good sound. So we're going to look at basics in this lesson, and we're going to get to the music stuff in a minute. But this will go quick because it's not that complicated. So if you want to get a drum to use in this style, we'll call it the Native American style, shamanic drumming style. And I use that as a kind of generic term, not as a, if you do this, you will be a shaman, style. It's just a style of playing. So you're going to have a drum that has some sort of handle in the back, and let me give you the overhead. So something like this doesn't have to be this ornate or fancy. It could be simple, like a bowron, like just a cross, or some ropes or something. But I'm going to use this one. And there's different styles. You can hold it different ways. You just find the way that's right for you. I might hold it like this, depending on your hand size and everything, and how it feels. You could just hold it down here. There's different ways of holding the drum. And of course, you need to find the way that's right for you. But generally speaking, we want to hold the drum up so it's not resting on our leg, because that dampens the sound. And when we get to playing, I'll show you that. I find that if I can suspend the drum, not have it touching anything, that's going to give me the most resonance. Now, you may not always want the drum to be at its maximum resonance. That's another choice that you have. You might want to have it more muted for different reasons. But we're going to start off with the maximum resonance. Holding the drum, just hold it at an angle like this, or however it works for you to have the mallet at a really comfortable angle. And I understand that this is very basic stuff, but it's basic, but it's important, because this is about getting everything kind of ergonomic and comfortable. And the reason you want to consider these things before you start is that usually if you're engaging in some sort of meditative music practice, it goes on for some time. And you don't want to start off in a situation that might feel okay, because after 5 or 10 minutes, and that's not even a long time, we're talking it could go 30 minutes or an hour or multiple hours in some cases of continuous drumming, with certain situations. So you want to really make things ergonomic and comfortable. So it's all a drop in the bucket, but that bucket fills up pretty quick. All right, so we're going to start off with just shoulders relaxed, sitting comfortably. You can sit in a chair, you could stand, you could be on the floor in a comfortable position. Wherever you're going to feel most comfortable. Drum is angled, shoulders are relaxed, like I said, just comfortable. And then holding the mallet with a light, really light touch. You want to find that spot on the drum where it's going to bounce off. And look at my technique right here. I'm really using almost just like fingers, just these fingers down here, fingertips, and I've got a fulcrum right in between my thumb and my index finger, and I'm just very lightly bouncing off the drum. And as I do this, I'm going to be searching, I'm checking and exploring here. So moving in, you can hear the difference. This area, maybe up here towards the edge, very different sound. Getting out to the edge. So all over the drum, all over the mallet, different angles, the sound changes a lot. So because we're not working with a huge range of techniques, we're really just using one technique, but little changes become more important when you narrow the scope, right? So you're going to be exploring the sound, and this is, I would say, your first assignment if you'd like to engage in this practice, is to do this and really pay attention. This relates to the music mindfulness work that we're going to be doing here on the channel as well. So it's about attention and paying attention to those little details, little changes. And I think you'll find that when you're engaged in that mode and you don't hear the sound just as, oh yeah, I'm playing the drum, just hitting the drum. But when you pay attention to every note, you start to find that there's a lot of difference and a lot of music and a lot of artistry that you can pull out with those small little changes. And I think that's exciting. Now, another thing you want to be aware of, I'm going to go back to the overhead, and I don't know how well you can see this. I think you can see it pretty well. There's a seam here that runs around this mallet because this mallet is put together, it's sewn together. And you might have a mallet that's wrapped or something, but you want to be aware of where the seams are because that is a very different sound. Again, you could be hitting this way, and then if I turn the mallet, listen to the sound. Wow, huge change, right? So you may or may not want that. You might want that sound. It's a different sound. I'm not saying that there are good and bad sounds. There's no such thing as good or bad music or sounds. Every sound is useful. It's just a matter of you making a conscious or unconscious choice. So this is an area of exploration, that it's a different option. You have sounds, but you want to be, cognizant and conscientious about how you're playing the drum. So we've got that. Now let's move on, and you can do more with exploring the different sounds on the drum. I'm not going to do everything right now. Obviously, there's other ways you can hit the drum and get other sounds and use the mallet in different ways. But I want to move on because this is an introduction. So already, if you can have an instrument, you can start to explore that kind of attention to detail. Let's talk about the rhythmic component of what is generally considered, quote unquote, shamanic drumming. And if you go online, you can do some research, you'll find that a starting place is about 4 hits per second. In my study, I've seen 4 to 7 hits per second, or strikes per second, or pulses. And the scientific side, you'll find that people refer to the brain waves, brain frequencies, and you'll see words like theta and delta and alpha brain waves, and people have talked about entrainment. I'm not going to speak to that because I haven't done studies with scientists, and I haven't done all this brain monitoring. So the research is out there. You can take it as you will. I would take everything with a grain of salt. What's important for us is just to understand, okay, how does 4 beats per second sound? So you can experiment with that. Now, an easy way to find 4 beats per second, of course, is to have a metronome that's set to 1 second, and we're just going to play 4 subdivisions. So all we're doing right now is getting our feet wet and getting our bearings. So just listen. You can do this yourself. Set the metronome, or you don't even need a metronome. You just need a watch, right, that has a second hand that clicks, and you can see 60 beats per second. So it could be visual, it could be auditory. I'm going to play the metronome click. It's got a high and low tone, back and forth. And then I'm going to play, hopefully, 4 notes per second. Let's see what that sounds like. So I think we know about where we are. I'll play it again without the click, and just listen. And what I'm going to do is try to be very consistent with my sound and not change too much, and I'll tell you why right after. But here's just a little bit of playing. All right, that was very short in terms of this practice, but I wanted to pause and not have the video go on and on. You can do your own drumming for yourself, and maybe I'll make a track for us all, and you can listen to that and experiment with how that feels to listen to the drum over an extended period of time. But I want to pause right now so the video doesn't go on and talk about why are we playing at around that tempo, and why are we playing very simply and not putting a lot of ornamentation or accents or trying to make it fancier. And there are multiple answers to that question. I have a couple reasons. So why are we playing it for? Well, again, getting back to this brainwave idea, that's 4 beats or 4 pulses per second has been associated with some of the theta waves, the relaxation waves, that kind of dream state, between consciousness and unconsciousness. And this is the theory. And I want to be clear that when I talk about these things, I'm talking about people's ideas. You could use the word theory. You could use the word construct. These are not absolute proven facts. They are ideas. And, a lot of people have different ideas, but I just wanted to communicate one perspective to you. And then invite you to experiment. I think that's the most powerful thing, is just firsthand experience. See how it is for you, because that's the most valid thing for you. So that's the reason we're doing 4 hits per second. Now you can imagine 6 or 7 hits per second is pretty fast. That's a lot. So even 4, we're talking about 240 hits per minute. So it's clipping right along. To me, it has a feeling of rapidness because it is fast, but at the same time, because it's so consistent, we don't have a meter, and so it becomes almost like a drone, right? A drone, like one long note. And with a drum like this, you can hear that there is a long reverberating or resonating tone. Now, one of the reasons that we want to be consistent is that we don't want to reignite the attention of the person, of the listener, by making changes. What happens, and again, this is what I have read and heard, is that after about 4 or 5 seconds of hearing a pattern, and in this case, the pattern is just the frequency of the hits. Besides that, there's really no pattern, right? So the pattern is dun 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 dun. Well, after 4 or 5 seconds of hearing that, our mind doesn't pay as close attention to it. And thereby, it can free up mental space or capacity for other things like daydreaming or journeying or relaxation. My perspective, my belief is that the drumming is functioning as a kind of mental placeholder, and it's taking up just enough attention so that the mind doesn't look for more things to pay attention to, like thinking about the future or thinking about the past, but that it almost has this kind of masking of the thought, masking of thinking effect, that it's giving you enough to hold on to, it's giving your mind enough to kind of hold on to, but not too much that you keep going, oh, what was that? What was that? Because our minds or our attention goes to things that change in the landscape. Right? If you think about a landscape, you're just gazing out at a landscape. All right, you can look at the whole landscape, but where will your attention immediately go? It will go towards anything in that landscape that changes. So if it's a tree that bends, or if there's a little rabbit that runs out, something change, anything that changes, if a bird swoops down, that's exactly where your attention is going to go. And that's, of course, how we're designed. And that's good. We need to be paying attention to changes. But when we see a pattern, when we experience a pattern, we only pay close attention to it for a fairly short period of time. And then we kind of mentally check it off and we just kind of set it aside. And our mind, we say, okay, I know what that is. I don't have to pay attention to it with that much energy, but it's there. So I hope that makes sense. So we have the drumming, and it's there, it's motoring along, but it almost has a soothing effect, after a few seconds. And then our mind is free to do other things, but not so free that it goes crazy wandering all over, because the rhythm is acting like an anchor. All right. That is my perspective of it. That's my belief. I really encourage you to have your own experience of this kind of drumming and not take my word or anybody else's word for it. All right. Your experience belongs to you, and it's incumbent upon each of us to do our own research on ourselves and have your own experience. I would never venture to conclude that everybody has the same experience, or if I did this kind of drumming for someone else, that they would have an experience like mine. All right, so this is investigatory, it's experimentation, and you are a unique individual. So have your own experience, and whatever your experience is valid for you. Okay, so that's why we want to make the drumming consistent. Now, some people might want to use the word or think that it should be called boring because it's not changing a lot. But you have to understand that this is a functional kind of music. We're performing a function here. And if you think that you're going to make it better, quote unquote, better by throwing in some accents, like you want to do, Now, you could do that, but that's more entertainment. That's because you want something interesting to you, right? That's aesthetics. That's okay, but that's not necessarily going to serve the function that we're going for here. So I hope that makes sense. And on top of that, let's just conclude with this. I think it's an interesting discipline to hold a simple rhythm and not want to try to change it or make it, quote, better, right? Why isn't it good enough the way it is? What's wrong with the Zen garden, right? We don't need to plant a bunch of trees in the Zen garden, right? The Zen garden is the Zen garden. It has a function, and which I think one of which is to allow us to open into the space, right? So if we're filling up the Zen garden with a lot of stuff, it's not a Zen garden anymore. So there's a beauty to simplicity, and you can think about art, very simple, landscapes, very open, beautiful, maybe just the ocean or a desert or the sky. Very simple and full of possibilities. All right. So let's leave it there. So you've got some homework. You can get the drum. You can experiment with sounds. Find a playing style and a position that's comfortable for you. You can experiment with this rhythmic playing, simplicity, resisting the urge to be fancy, see how it feels to play, and if you have somebody to play for, or somebody who could play for you, you could take turns playing for each other. You could play together. That's a different dynamic. All right? And experiment with that, and then let me know how that was. And we'll meet up, live at some point, and we can discuss these experiences. All right? Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you all in the next lesson. Enjoy.